Good evening, everybody. For history departments across the US, the past 15 years since the Great Recession have been pretty tough. In that time, we've seen a significant drop in majors as students embrace a baseless myth that a degree in history is a poor career choice. This has led many to wonder, is the college history major a dying breed? Here's the irony, though. In that very same time period, fictionalized versions of history have dominated American pop culture. When it comes to films, television shows, and books, Americans of all ages are clearly fascinated with representations of the past. But among college-aged folks, perhaps the closest encounter that many have with historical content comes through video games. Historically themed games have sold hundreds of millions of copies, and many provide a far deeper engagement with the past than do movies and shows, with many games taking dozens, if not hundreds of hours to complete. So the question is, should professional historians seek to harness this digital enthusiasm and turn it toward serious studies of the past? For decades, historians have largely declined to do so, dismissing the gaming world for its lack of complexity, its white male focus, and its excessive violence. However, that is beginning to change. The pandemic made video games a bigger industry than movies and sports combined, and many recent games are more thoughtful, inclusive, and mature than earlier ones. Historians are growing more curious, and I'm one of them. And tonight, I want to share my experience in teaching and writing about history through video games. Why would I personally want to do this? Well, as it turns out, I have a bit of history here. Back in high school, this is a photo from that era, I was a die-hard gamer. However, when I got to college, I quit playing games, and I really didn't look back for 20 years. That is, until COVID hit. And the first games that I picked up in the pandemic were historical in content, the Red Dead Redemption series, which are set in turn-of-the-century America. They're marketed as cowboy games, but they're actually way more than that. They're set not just in the West, but in the Deep South, in southern Appalachia, and even in Mexico. And for me, playing these games as a professional historian, I was continuously struck by how thoughtful these games sometimes were. Though not always accurate in a traditional sense, they often gestured toward major historical dilemmas, things like race, class, capitalism, and empire. So it wasn't long before I began to wonder, could I perhaps design an undergraduate class that used these best-selling games as a hook to draw students into a serious exploration of turn-of-the-century America? This is precisely what I did in the fall of 2021 with the experimental US history class, Red Dead America. And to publicize this class in the midst of the pandemic and to get word out among UT students, I took to social media, posting this on Twitter in February of last year. And as I'd hoped, it got lots of attention. This post was viewed by nearly 250,000 people, both locally and internationally. This class also got a lot of coverage in the broader video game press, both in English language sites and in many, many foreign language sites. But most importantly, this social media campaign got the word out with my most important target demographic, which was UT students, of course. And because of it, my class quickly filled to more than 4 times the expected size of a course of this type. Let me switch gears at this point and consider how one might actually use the historical fiction of a video game to seriously explore the past, without any sacrifices of complexity. Let me give an example from my class that's drawn from the more recent Red Dead Redemption 2 game set in 1899. A great deal of this game takes place in the Deep South, 35 years after the Civil War. And in the game, players quickly come across scenes like this one, public monuments to the Confederacy. These statues seek to honor the Confederate dead and their cause, which they claim was honorable. As it turns out, statues like these were indeed very common in the Deep South of this era. Here's a photo taken in Augusta, Georgia in 1903. Statues like these were built to reinforce a mythology known as the Lost Cause, a romanticized and totally false view that the South had fought not for slavery, but for noble ideals. So the game does an excellent job of rendering this toxic myth on screen, but the game falls short on one key issue. The game statues look old. The digital textures of the game statue speak to the wear and tear of many, many decades. As it turns out, that would have been completely wrong. These statues would have been brand spanking new in the 1890s. Why? Well, as it turns out, almost all of the South's public monuments to the Confederacy were built in the 1890s and 1900s, not directly after the Civil War. And the timing was not accidental. The statues were built as symbolic monuments to white supremacy in a moment when white Southerners felt under threat. In the 1890s, a third-party political movement threatened to bring together poor white and black Southerners, and it terrified white elites. In response, they overhaul their society in the 1890s. They exclude black men from voting, they enact laws segregating public spaces, and they built a lot of statues. We need to keep this history in mind when debating Confederate memorials today, because these statues are not just about the Civil War, they're just as much about the 1890s when a mythical interpretation of the war was used to justify white racism and black exclusion. And that's a good enough reason to tear these things down, as far as I'm concerned. This is just one of the many topics that historians can use video games to broach. And indeed, teaching this class convinced me that there's tremendous opportunity in reaching not just students, but regular Americans with this effort. I'm now writing a book based on this class, titled Red Dead History, that's aimed mainly at video gamers. I've signed a contract with a major trade publisher to do this book, and my hope is that it will repackage serious history for a much broader audience than academics are used to. Perhaps this class and this book can be part of a larger effort to expand the reach of the humanities by making fields like history relevant and accessible to a new generation. Thank you all so much.